All right. Well, welcome to the College Admission Lab from Khan Lab School. I'm your host, Brennan Barnard. I'm the Director of College Counseling, and I am joined today by our founder, Sal Khan. Sal is also the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, Schoolhouse.World, and Khan World School. Welcome, Sal.
Good to be here.
And our guest is Rachelle Hernandez, who is the Vice Provost for Student Affairs at Johns Hopkins University. And Rachelle was previously the Senior Vice Provost for Enrollment Management and Student Success at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as some stints in other places that I will let her tell you about. And before we get rolling here, we're going to be using the chat and the Q&A. So if you can go in and share where you're zooming in from today, that'd be great in the chat. And then use the Q&A for any questions you might have for our guests tonight. So Rachelle, thanks for being here. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you both.
So we'll talk about admission this evening a bit, but we're going to focus on the kind of what happens next, right? After an applicant is admitted and the transition to college. We really want to focus on that transition. So I hope folks will kind of center their questions on that. And before we dive into that, Rachelle, can you start by just giving us a brief overview of kind of your educational career journey, how you got to where you are, what your current job entails?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, first of all, hello to everyone who's here. I'm so pleased to be here to talk with you all and just to share and to learn from everyone here about the experiences that they're having and the questions they have. But so my journey. So my first job was at the university that I attended as a college student. And it's also where I have continued, where I did graduate work and continue to do some graduate work and research, actually focused on student success and retention in college. I worked directly in college admissions and enrollment and student success for 30 years. And now I have the privilege in my role as Vice Provost for Student Affairs in supporting students in the student experience and their student success journey. I would say that for like most people, Brennan and Saul, I didn't know what a Vice Provost for Student Affairs was or what enrollment management or admissions was when I was a college student, but I engaged in a number of student activities as a college student. One of them was as an admissions ambassador, a volunteer ambassador. So I gave tours and met with prospective students, and then eventually held the senior enrollment role at that institution. But I also engaged in a number of student activities in different realms that I get to support and foster in my role now. So the kinds of things that students can do not only to support their academic journey and success, but also to really help them engage in the institution. And one of my roles now is to make sure that our students get to take full advantage of all that the university has to offer. But really our goal and our focus is to help students along their educational journey on the path to achieving their dreams. So we get to receive students at the moment when they're excited about what comes next and their families are thinking about this is that next step on their educational journey. And we get to see them sometimes in some tough moments, but definitely in their moments of celebration when they're experiencing success, really as they put together the pieces of a college journey that helps them achieve their dreams. That's what we get to do is support our students on the way to achieving their dreams.
Pretty great stuff.
It
Pretty
is. It
rewarding
is.
work. And so we're going to return to that piece on student success in a second. But Sal, maybe you can just, I know you were just earlier this month at Johns Hopkins giving the commencement address, and you gave the commencement address at Carnegie Mellon as well. And, I would love to hear just kind of what the crux of your advice to students was on this kind of time of transition and how that might kind of play out for students in high school who are transitioning to college.
Yeah, it was fun. I didn't want to just show up as a stranger, so both for Carnegie Mellon and Johns Hopkins, I set up a Zoom ahead of time to just kind of do an ask me anything with the students, just to get a gauge. I think I had a sense of when I was in their shoes, what was front of mind for me, and then but it was helpful to kind of hear it straight from them, and it was pretty similar. Although I think they are coming of age at an even more uncertain time than I did. Yeah, some of the classic things that I think we all worried about when or many of us did, I did when I graduated from college was, okay, I've been pretty successful academically. Will that translate into the real world? Um, the real world seems a little bit messier, a little bit more ambiguous, not as clear cut. That was a little bit of uncertainty. What path should I follow? How do I make my dent in the universe while also being pragmatic and paying bills and paying off debt and things like that? So that was the stuff that I worried about. When I talked to the students before the commencement, it was clear that that was definitely front of mind. But then they have the added uncertainty around, wow, there's this artificial intelligence stuff going on that seems to be hitting all careers in different ways. There's definitely some exciting aspects of it, but definitely some scary aspects of it. In some ways, the whole world order, for better or for worse, is under question now. So what's going to be their future? So there was even more uncertainty. So one of the things I tried to do for these students, and it's interesting because I'm going to give 3 commencement addresses this year: Carnegie Mellon, Johns Hopkins, and Khan Lab School. And so I've, Khan Lab School is a little bit smaller, more a little boutique. But I've been thinking about actually how they're going to be different. Because I think there is a difference between what I tell high school students and what I tell college students. What I tried to do, and I didn't give the same speech. People can verify it, the Carnegie Mellon and the Johns Hopkins. I have so much advice to give that I have to spread it across 2 different commencement addresses. There were some common themes, but the big picture is like, yes, you are entering, like, this is a moment in history. And the Johns Hopkins speech in particular, I said, like, this is the singularity. For most of the last few decades, I was also someone who rolled my eyes when someone said, we are entering a singularity. And, I was like, oh, you're just a little bit too much of a science fiction, whatever. But now when you look at the signs, we are, AI accelerating, and then AI accelerating other parts of our life. We're going to have economic disruption, but we're going to have increases in productivity. People are seriously talking about curing diseases in accelerated ways. So I tried to tell the students, look, any adventure in your life is going to, like, no adventure is without stress. In fact, that's what makes an adventure an adventure. If you knew you were going to succeed, it's not exciting. And so you are coming of age in one of the most exciting and scary times in the history of humanity, which is a grand thing to say. But in the Johns Hopkins speech, I started off with like fire and tools 1,000,000+ years ago, all the way to agriculture and writing and blah, 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 blah. And we are in one of those moments. And what I tried to, and then this was for both of the Carnegie Mellon and Johns Hopkins students, I tried to make them emphasize that, like, what becomes of this inflection point is really up to them, especially as students graduating with a lot of opportunity, very capable. If they lean into it, if they use AI and other tools to amplify their intent, not just as technologists, but including, artists and policymakers and educators, we have, that's our best shot. It's not like we have to just like, oh, AI is scary, I'm going to run away from it. But I also tried to prepare them a little bit, because when I graduated, I was afraid of the real world, and my first job, it was disappointing. I did, after you leave a vibrant environment where everyone is like, doing interesting things, and you're having awesome conversations in the dining hall and the dorms, and there's these amazing professors and all that. You get to the workforce, no one's really, there's people in HR, but there's not the equivalent of a vice provost of student affairs at most employers who really care about growing you as a person. And, when you go into the real world, it's a little bit like, okay, how am I going to advance? There's no grading. It seems like whatever that boss thinks of us, that's going to be somewhat arbitrary when I'll get promoted. And it took me a while to find my footing. So I tried to, in different ways, both commencement addresses, kind of prepare the students for maybe some of that disappointment. Hopefully they don't get super disappointed, but if they do, to recognize that that's part of it. And it really is about chipping away, and you're going to learn a lot. I did mention a lot about, there's like real things in the world to stress about. If heaven forbid you or someone you care about gets sick or is under financial stress, things like that. Those are real personal worries to have. But most of what we stress about at work is like, okay, how come I didn't get a good review? Or I should have gotten that promotion? Or how come I'm not making more money? Or why did that person say that thing at that meeting? And I tried to make them say, like, look, that's part of the growth. And anytime you have problems that are going to make you grow, that's actually an opportunity. Saying you get to have those problems, not that you have to. So they have to stick to it. They have to realize they're in an exciting time, etc. For high school students, it's a little different, where you are about to enter into this broader world, but it's kind of adulthood with training wheels, where there's going to be a lot of people who are going to, in college, who are going to be there to support you, but you need to really lean into it. And you know, Brennan, you and I always tell our students there's no right decision where you go to college, it's making the decision right. And that's about stepping out of your comfort zone, trying new things, smiling a lot, meeting people you wouldn't have otherwise met, because college is an environment where people will want to support you, where you can make these deep friendships that are actually going to be hard to make later on in life. Things like that. So, you know, I'm definitely hopefully the high school students are going to get, they lean in, they'll get more excited. The college students, there's a lot to be done in the world. You might be a little disappointed initially, but you'll get through it.
Well, but thanks. And I mean, there's a parallel, right, Rachel? Because I think a lot of students go to college and there is that disappointment. No, you know, it might be the first week, it might be the first month, might be three months in, but there's that point where most college students, right, are kind of second guess their decision. Or a lot of them do at least. And there is that kind of disappointment because they've built up, this has been my experience, they've built up what this college that they've been accepted to is in their mind, and they get there and it's like, well, not everything's perfect. Can you talk just a little bit about kind of how you see that?
Yeah, well, I can attest to the fact that Sal's speech was good and was both appropriately exciting and also realistic. So I think that's great. Yeah, Brenda, first of all, I would say that the transition from high school to college, this is a really exciting time, right? And you, like you said, you can really get swept up in that excitement. But one of the things that I always talk with students, and I'm a parent of a college student as well, and I'm also the parent of a rising senior. So we're going to go through this again for them. And I worked in higher ed my whole career. So, right, I should know everything. But what we know is that it's good for students to think about why they've chosen the school they're going to, right? You can get excited about the hype. You can get excited about what it's going to be like in college. You know, a lot of students might say, well, when I'm in college, it'll be different, right? Everything will be different. My academic experience will be different. My friends will be different. And the thing I think that's most important for students to think about is to lean into who they are. You know, you chose this school, the school chose you, and this will be a good experience. But from a family perspective or from a student perspective, it's just important for students to not worry about what they're hearing or what the hype is that they're hearing from their friends. One of the things that can happen, like you said, students might go to school and feel like, gosh, this isn't what I thought. And sometimes there are two reasons for that. One is because they're comparing their experience to what they're hearing from their friends or what their families are hearing from their friends' families. And that's always part of the story. It's not the whole story, right? It might be what they read, what they heard. And we want for students to remember this is their experience. They don't have to compare it to someone else's. This is their opportunity. We want them to lean into it. So I think sort of pushing out that perspective or that comparison can be really helpful. But then the second thing is to get to know your university or your school, right? And students who've been admitted and know where they're going to school, they can start that now. They spent the time maybe visiting the school. We might have some families here whose students haven't even had a chance to visit the school. The first time they're going to go to the school is when they move in, right? Every fall, I talk to students who've never set foot here because they couldn't afford to travel or they didn't have the opportunity, you know, so they've seen videos, they've done virtual experiences. But students can spend time getting to know the school. They can attend virtual sessions during the summer. They can look at the kinds of organizations that the university offers. They can do tours of the residence halls that they're going to be living in virtually. They can also get ready for their advising appointments as they go to orientation. Those are the kinds of things that help you level set. So I think, Saul, what you were saying is we're going to manage expectations, right? And I think that's what students can do. I think it is one of the most exciting times for students for a whole host of reasons. The college transition opens up a lot of doors of opportunities. It gives students a chance to be more independent. That can be positive and scary. They're going to a time now where they don't have the same schedule they did in high school. And sometimes students can say, wow, I have 3 hours of class and I have all this free time, right? You've got to be disciplined and you've got to be focused, but that doesn't mean that it won't be an extraordinary experience and opportunity. You are going to meet new people. You are going to have new experiences. You're going to have the opportunity to make some decisions on your own, right? You'll always need your family. They'll always be there, but you have this opportunity. So the more that students can get to know their school as they're transitioning, again, if they can't do it in person, there are lots of virtual ways for them to do it. They can talk to alums, et cetera. The more they understand what they're getting and the more they can lean into that choice. And you know what I say about choice. When you choose a school, you're halfway there in terms of success. It's a place that you want to be. As you just said, I don't have to go there. I get to go there. This is an opportunity for students to explore what's next for them and to get to know their interests and their passions, and to do so while they're progressing to a degree which will set them up for further success in their career. So these are all positives. It may not be the perfect experience because, yes, you still have to go to class and you have to do laundry. And if you're in a student organization and you're a leader, you have to run a meeting. These are all things that you have to do. But they're also things that give you skills and experiences and opportunities that will open doors. And from my perspective, that's exciting. So I think it's just getting to know and leaning into that choice. Be proud of yourself, be excited about the choice that you're making, and make the most of the opportunity.
Well, and also, I mean, a lot of students have never been away from home for extended periods.
Absolutely.
And so
Yes.
allow yourself some grace that it will not always be comfortable, right? And it's going.
Right. Well, we've talked a lot about quotes tonight, and right, they say discomfort is when you're uncomfortable, you're learning. When you're uncomfortable, you're growing. And that's something for families, for all of us to think about too. You know, when your student calls home for the first time, they may need to talk about it. They may need some support, and they really need their family to say, you know, what do you think you could do about it? That, do you know any resources at your school that you could access, right? So there's a lot of opportunity here for life isn't perfect, but this is still an exciting time.
Yeah. Well, Sal, because Rachel brought up parents, let's kind of dig into that. You've seen 4 classes from KLS successfully make this transition as a family. Can you share any advice for parents as they kind of go through this with their kids?
Well, my oldest is a rising junior, so I haven't gone through it directly as a parent yet. Y'all have. I will say, and this is just following on Rachel saying, I'll tell you something that I've observed. I observed it when I was in college, and I've observed it with students ever since. You know, obviously, most people want to get into. There's sometimes what I would call the curse of getting into your first choice, which is, you know, there are some students who say, oh, you know, they absolutely fixate on a certain school, which we in multiple conversations like this encourage people not to do. And sometimes they get into that school. You know, like my dream from childhood, I knew when I was 6 years old, I wanted to go to Johns Hopkins. And if I go to Johns, and the curse there is, if you get in, not all students, but some students, they kind of think they're done. They kind of like, oh, my life is set. If only I would go to Johns Hopkins, my life is set. And no, that's just a beginning. It's all this huge opportunity. And I've actually seen parents fall into that too. And
Yeah.
I won't name names in my own family, but I remember when I was graduating from business school, um, I was graduating into a very hard job market. This was 2003. It was kind of post-dot-com bust. And I remember actually, I won't say who said this from my family, like, oh, you're graduating from Harvard Business School. You must be making millions now. And I'm like, I'm having trouble getting a job, right? Like so I think parents could, especially if they haven't gone through, like they might think, oh, I didn't go to college. You're going to Johns Hopkins. You're going to Harvard Business School. You're going to Stanford, whatever. Your life is going to be easy now. And the student is feeling pressure from that. They're like, well, it's not that easy. When I go to Johns Hopkins, there's 1,000 other kids who are now super bright. Like I used to think I was one of the brightest kids I knew. Now I'm in a big, you know, I'm a medium fish in a big pond, and I'm meeting all these other super bright kids. And almost every student, especially when you go to a highly selective university, you immediately some students feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, like, hey, how did I get in here? Look at how smart that kid is. Look how smart that kid is. Now that kid is thinking about that about you too. So
Yeah,
you should it's symmetric. It's symmetric. And so there could be this dissonance where you had all these expectations, your life is set, your family's like, oh, you're the champion of our family, you're going to become president of the United States. But you go there and you're like, wow, there's a lot of other bright people here. I need to I need to do my laundry. Maybe I'm having a hard time. I don't get along with my roommate, which is once again a moment of growth. And I see the other side of it. And this doesn't always happen when you get into your first choice, as long as you have a reasonable expectations and you put yourself out there and keep making the decision right. And I've also seen the other way. Sometimes kids reluctantly aren't going to their first choice. They say, oh, I didn't get into A, B, or C. I'll go here. It's pretty good. And then they're very, wow, this is really good. This is better than I thought. This is better than my first choice. You know, I got fixated on my first choice because I liked their brochure or whatever, but this has even a better programmer. So you also see that upside. So anyway, I would just say for parents, try your best not to project onto students. Either project your own, I wish I had done this in college, now you should do it, or I didn't have this opportunity, now you do, and I'm paying lots of money. Surely your life is going to be easier, because it is a stressful time. And all of a sudden you do find yourself in a much broader pool, which is exciting, but it can also be a little bit daunting. So be supportive of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Rachel, how about, what are mistakes you see parents make as they kind of transition with their child to college?
Well,
Or
I'm going to I'm going to pull a thread that Saul just said. And I think families, parents, guardians, whomever's supporting the student, we also need to give ourselves a little bit of grace, especially if this is the first time you've gone through it, or, I have more than one child, and watching my second child go through this, my kids are completely different. They're going to have different pathways and approach this process differently. So I'd say give ourselves some grace. But I think one of the things that's really important, and Sal, you were just talking about this, is that just to remember that the student is going through this. I think as families, I talk to some of my friends who are going on school visits with their students, and it's I'm visiting or we're visiting versus the student is visiting, right? Or I'm bringing so-and-so to college versus the student is moving to college. And so to remember that they're going through the experience. And I would say for families in particular who maybe have a parent or both parents who do have a college degree, one of the sort of spaces we can fall into is, oh, I went to college, I remember, or I know what that's like, or I know who to call. And things are different. My college student is going through a very different experience. Everything he's doing is completely, he registers differently than I did when I was in college. His tuition is different. His housing experience is different. And so I have to remind myself too. And in fact, my husband will say, one, he's not you and he doesn't work in higher ed, right? So I have to remember that this is his experience. And I think that's again, an opportunity for us to show up for our students, and also to be a little humble that we maybe aren't the expert, because they're the ones who have been admitted, they're getting the direct information. They're the ones who are going to be on campus. And one of the tricks that I use all the time is that my son will call, and he did this his first year. Mom, I have this question, I don't know. So we would go through this process, and I would say, okay, what's your question? And I would ask him, who do you think you should talk to on campus? And he would say, well, this stuff, right? He knows I worked in admissions. He knows I worked in financial aid. He knows all of that. And I would say, no, what do you think? And then we would take a minute and we would look online. And if you're not sure what the office is, okay, show me what your process is. And the point was, yes, I could tell you because I work in higher ed, but this is your experience. I am not physically next to you. I can't get to you quickly. I want for you to learn. So I think remembering that it's their experience and helping support them in that learning is important. I would say the second thing is maybe aligned with this, is that they're not in high school anymore, and they're not in middle school. And so they have to intervene and navigate. So their first test, they get a grade maybe that they weren't happy with, right? That's their conversation, and maybe they haven't talked to a teacher before. Maybe that was something the family did. So again, I think helping them be on their journey. But the second thing that I would say, and this is both for families and students alike, is particularly if you think, the university or college, if it's in your hometown or if it's close to you, I hear families say, oh, well, we're familiar. We've been to a game there. We've been to an activity there. We don't need to go to that orientation event, or I don't think I have to attend family orientation because I don't need to know that. And I think remembering that this is going to be a new experience for you too. And one of the ways that you can support your student is to hear from the school about the way that they engage with families. The school will remind us all as parents and families that this is the student's experience, and there are ways that we can engage differently than we did when we were in high school. But it's a way for families to get information and knowledge and have a sense of what's happening for their student. And in that capacity, families are really well poised to support student success. Again, students might call home and say, I need a campus job. Well, if you're going to the family orientation, you might know that there's an employment center. So you can say to the student, oh, I know Hopkins has this great place called, integrative learning and life design, and you can get a job there, right? And you can work with those folks to get a campus job. So helping your student know that you're there, that you're not doing for, but that you're guiding, I think is really important. And again, mistake, I would just say, don't assume you know something, right? We all are learning. This is a new experience and things change, whether you've been to college or not. As a family, it's good to know more about the school, but so that you can support your student and help them engage further, and give them some space. The last thing I would say is make sure your students know how to do their laundry.
I had to teach a roommate. I won't. He's very
So
successful now.
mistakes not, we think they know, but do a test before they go off to school. Make sure they know how to wash their clothes.
I knew how to do my laundry, but the ironing, it was not happening.
Well, not only know how to do their laundry, but recognize that it's not just your clothes. You also have to wash your towel and your sheets. A lot of kids don't realize that because it just happens for them.
This sounds kind of funny, but our kids are so busy today. They're doing a million different things. And my older son, for example, when he played sports, his high school washed their uniforms. They didn't bring them home. And so you don't realize that maybe they don't know they have to wash their athletic clothes, even if they're just working out or whatever. And it's the kind of thing that if they know how to do it, it actually reduces stress. They can spend more time focusing on their activities or their academics. They don't ruin clothes. They don't have to worry about having to replace items that have been ruined. So some of those life skills, basic things, just make sure they know.
Yeah. And Sal, any other thoughts on other life skills they should know or kind of things they should be prepared for?
Oh, well, I think definitely the cleanliness and the clothes washing is an important one. I think that's probably the biggest source of conflict. I think probably, I don't know if this is a life skill, but tolerance. I mean, you're gonna have a roommate. Sometimes you get to pick them. Even if you do get to pick them, you'll realize that, when push comes to shove, you can sometimes not get along with, but that's part of the growth. Um, Time management is going to be a big one. I do think most college students, I was horrible at time management, but you learn the hard way. Like that all-nighter have to happen. You suffered. You didn't have to suffer if you just, I don't expect students from day one are going to get that right. I think that's part of college is to have to go through some of that and to say like, maybe I should, do my problem sets earlier, things like that. Um, other life, I mean, look, I honestly think the biggest one, and I tell this to the KLS students is, try to be out there, open to people, smile, introduce yourself. It's very easy to convince yourself that that other person doesn't want to talk to you, or maybe the first time you say hi, they don't notice, or they're like a little bit weirded out, but keep at it. And that's like the single best thing that if you project that positivity out, and you show it in your face, it will eventually come back to you.
Yeah. And I want to go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, Sal, you just commented when you're talking about your first job at HR earlier. One of the things that people always say is at work, make sure you don't ever eat lunch alone. That's something we can also say to our students is when you go to the dining hall, eat lunch with somebody, meet somebody new.
And organize things. Say, hey, there's a show in town. Who wants to come? Don't just don't be just passive observer. If
Right.
you become the organizer, you'll have a lot of friends.
And coming back to the roommate piece, I think the tolerance or the understanding or the kind of compromise is really important, but also to recognize that that person doesn't have to be your best friend, right? And sometimes it's better if they're not, right? And so that the kind of to set expectations there that this person is going to be a big part of your life, but doesn't have to be your kind of your ride or die in college, right?
That's right.
And I do want to mention what a point that Wendy brought up here in the Q&A, because I was going to mention this earlier about parents kind of adjusting to the fact that in high school, oftentimes they've had access to their students' grades, they've had access to obviously to their health records and all that kind of stuff. So they've really had the reins on a lot of this. And because of the FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, did I get that right? That parents don't have all that in college, right? And so all of this stuff is going to go through your student, and you can sign. Could you talk a little bit about the waiver?
Yes, every school will have an opportunity for the student to sign a waiver, giving access to whomever they designate their families to information. So it could be their bill, it could be sometimes it's grades and additional information. But if a student doesn't approve that or authorize that family to have access to that, you can't see it, like you just said, Brendan. You can't see their tuition, you can't see their financial aid. And so that's an important conversation to have with your students. Because you might have a student who says, I'm 18 now, right? So I don't have to give permission. But if your family is helping to cover the costs, this is definitely a conversation you want to have. And oftentimes not something students even think too much about. They think, oh, I don't have to sign that for, I get to decide, but they don't really understand the ramifications of not having their family have access to it. And every school will go through this. So this is why going to orientation for your student is important, but it's also why family orientation is really important, or family meetings, because they will discuss and cover these things with you.
Yeah, when my daughter started college, I finally had to ask her. I said, have you gotten anything about paying? Because I haven't gotten anything, any kind of tuition bill or anything like that. And she says, oh yeah, I got an email. So we ironed that out pretty quickly. So I'm just looking at some of the questions. What from that came in through the Q&A and or for the registration. And one, we'll go back to roommates for a second. What happens if their roommate is not a good match, Rachel? How do you deal?
Yeah. So at most colleges and universities, this will happen. Lots of roommate matches or partners work out. As Brendan, you said, they may not be your best friend, but it's part of the college experience. You have a roommate. But if things aren't working out, typically what will happen is you would tell your RA, your resident assistant. So every college or university residence hall has resident assistants, and they have residence hall directors. So if you're at a university that has houses or colleges, that kind of thing, there will be an adult, a director, someone who oversees that space. And then there will be upperclassmen, juniors, seniors who are serving as assistants. And your student will know who they are. They will actually go through a whole host of this information at the first several residence meetings. So all the students in the residence hall will go to meetings with their resident assistant on a pretty regular basis. They will learn about roommate conflicts. They will learn about challenges if they need resources on campus. And they'll become sort of that confidant, that advisor if students have issues or concerns. And what they will typically do if there's a roommate conflict is they'll try to coach the student to see if the student has talked to the roommate about the issue or whatever the conflict is. Very honestly, oftentimes, we're coming out of COVID, students engage with each other virtually a lot, and they may not have a lot of experience with conflict management. So the resident assistant typically will sit down and coach the student through. Have you talked to the student about or your roommate about the fact that they play music until midnight and you want to go to sleep at 10? Have you mentioned it to them, or are you just mad? I mean, so they'll go through those kinds of things. If they can't work it out that way, then they will typically do a mediation, honestly. And oftentimes what we do, and many colleges and universities do this, is they'll sit the two roommates down and they'll work out a roommate agreement. Now, if it's an egregious situation, the two roommates can't get together. If it becomes really extreme, they may move roommates around, because we want for students to be able to be successful. We want for students to be able to get along. But our intention is going to be really to focus on student education and development and help students figure out how to work it out together to really deal with conflict, how to resolve conflict, how to compromise. And a roommate agreement really has two parties say, yes, this is an issue, and here's what I'm going to do to make it easier to live with me, and here's what I'm going to do to make it easier. So we're trying to teach those resolution skills, but students won't be on their own. They'll have a lot of resources to support that. It's not the typical, but it happens.
So you don't think it's a good idea? My roommate actually still is one of my best friends, and was definitely one of my best friends. But at one point, I did find myself taking masking tape and making a diagonal across the room. And I said, please, none of your stuff on this side and none of my stuff on that side.
Well, that might end up in the roommate agreement, right? That
Maybe.
there's a line.
We're still best friends. I was just texting him. We were just reminiscing. So anyway.
Yeah.
and worked with you at Khan Academy, right?
Not that.
Oh,
Shantanu was another roommate. We were actually pretty comparable on that front. So we never had
no
to
masking
keep them
tape
asking.
there.
There was another one. He knows. I'm not going to name names.
Sal, another question that came in through the registration was about kind of the academic transition. And, students at Khan Lab School and other schools are used to often really close relationships with their teachers and kind of having that support and having access and having them be really invested. What any any advice on to students as they go to college on how to kind of be advocates for themselves in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some muscles that are good to have going into any college experience, and then I think there's things that, I wish I appreciated better, and I definitely see students who can do that better now. The one thing is almost anywhere you go to college, you're probably not going to get quite the same attention and support that you might have gotten in high school. It's not going to be spoon-fed to you in that same way. No one's going to be checking on your homework on like a nightly basis and things like that. And so I think it is important to build that muscle of agency and autonomy. Obviously, something we try to do with the kids at KLS from a pretty early age, because you do see kids at top universities who are valedictorians of their school who had perfect GPAs. They go and struggle, and sometimes even fail out of classes, and it's usually because they haven't built that autonomy muscle. Sometimes it might be that their high school wasn't at the same, wasn't really preparing them academically for the more rigorous. So, the summer, for example, it's a great time to actually maybe do both. If maybe review some of the courses or start learning some of the courses that you're going to see freshman year, that first term, so that, while you're doing all this other stuff in mediation with your roommate and you're trying to figure out what clubs you want to join and trying to figure out the lay of the land, and you're also not super stressed of like, well, I'm completely lost in this class or that class. A lot of the classes I took my freshman year, I had already at least seen them, maybe not quite at the same level of rigor at the university, but I had already seen those topics before. And so that made it a much more gentle transition for me. So that's one thing. The one thing that I didn't take advantage of when I was in college, it's very easy, especially some of these freshman classes, there could be, depending where you go, there could be hundreds of people in that classroom. And the professor of record might be a famous person, someone who wrote a book, someone who's former head of state, someone who won a Nobel Prize. And it's very easy to convince yourself like that person does not want anything to do with you. I was definitely like, why would that person care about it? So I would just sit in class. Sometimes if I went, I would kind of like, I never thought, and I always kind of look down on the kids who were, who would dive down into the begin, and talk to the professor and all of that. I was like, oh, they're just trying to suck up and all that. I realized I was just trying to protect my own ego for fear of rejection, and try to be a little cooler than school there. Um, in hindsight, there were a lot of lost opportunities. Like if you go, don't just do it just to brown nose or just to kind of improve your grade, but like I think if you do have a genuinely an honest question and you really are interested or you really do need support, I actually think these professors are eager to talk to you and to find students. They don't like the student like me who sits in the back and kind of looks too cool for school, and they like the student who's coming up to them, showing engagement. And I've seen more often than not, even the Nobel Prize winners will oftentimes make time for you, and then that could be a really powerful relationship that you build that can open up other opportunities. So, it depends where you go. Some larger universities are very, very large classes, et cetera, et cetera. Some small liberal arts colleges, they're very small classes and it'll happen naturally. But generally, if you're engaged, you're genuinely interested, you shouldn't be afraid to talk to the professor.
Yeah, I mean, I think about a student who Sal, who graduated from KLS, who went to UCLA and was in a huge lecture class, and right from the beginning in his first year, and went down after class to talk to the professor to get to know them, and not just because that was his nature, and not because again, not the brown nose or anything like that, and just had a really great relationship with that professor and learned a lot from the course and from them, and it really kind of launched him into college on the right foot.
I'll
So
say one extra thing to that. I think some of us, and I would fall in this category, the high school where I went to, it wasn't the high school where, let's say if you looked too interested in your academics, it could be a problem for you. Let me just say that. So a lot of times, if you go to a traditional high school like that, you can get indoctrinated in like, even if you are interested, try to like not look like, don't try to be the students who's always raised. And I think what happens in college is um, it's it's actually the opposite. Like you're going to be in an environment where as long as you do it in a reasonable way, it's cool to be interested in what you're doing, and you shouldn't be afraid to show that. And once again, it'll open up more opportunities.
Absolutely. So, as we round out our time here, Rachel and Sal, I'd love for you each to kind of offer kind of one tip for students as they head into the summer and think about college, and just kind of a hope for them and their families. And maybe Sal, will start with you, and then Rachel, you can bring us home.
Yeah, I hate to start with like something that's very pragmatic, but I'll follow what I was said before. I think the summer, the last thing you want to do is go to college and you're trying to figure out all this, and then you're really struggling academically. That's very hard, very stressful. I'm sure Rachel has to deal with that with some students who are struggling. So use the summer to get really prepared. As I said, look at what you're going to likely to take. That figure out which of those courses you might feel like, hey, maybe I'm a little shaky on, et cetera, et cetera. And the beauty now is when Rachel, Brennan, and I went to college, there wasn't a lot of online resources out there. There was no online when I started college, at least. But now your university actually probably has a lot of the curricula, or there might be other similar universities that have their courseware out there. Obviously, you have resources like Khan Academy, there's the MOOCs, Coursera, edX, etc., where you can sample what those courses are going to be like and what the rigor is. And I guarantee if you spend some of your summer starting to learn those courses, that freshman year, that first term, second term is going to be so much more relaxing for you. And you're going to have much more energy to invest in the friendships and the clubs and the dorm mediation and and all of that. So I'd say that's the first one. And then once you show up at campus, I think, you know, join things that you never thought you would join. It's a chance to start anew. I just met someone actually at Johns Hopkins who's a part, one of the trustees who said when they went to Johns Hopkins, they had never played lacrosse. And by their senior year, they were like an all-American lacrosse player. I mean, obviously she was very athletic innately, but a lot of people don't think about the first time you start something might be your freshman year of college, but it actually can work. I remember I did like improv comedy for a year. It was incredibly stressful and I eventually quit, but it was a great experience. A lot of other clubs I joined, I stayed in. But yeah, just keep stepping out of your comfort zone and try new things. This is the time.
Well, and I would guess that the improv has come back to serve you well over the years.
Well, nothing is more stressful than that. Like now I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
video here, video there. All right, Rachel, bring us home.
So advice, well, I mean, Sal, you've given some really good advice. I think the thing that I would say for students and families is, as Sal said, there are a lot of resources that schools will roll out. When we talk to students about taking their placement exams, for example, we use tools that actually help to build their skills in math and science and other areas. So I think that's great. The thing that I would say though to students is that, as you're making this transition, this gets into the advocacy space, self-advocacy space. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We've got so many students coming to our schools where they either were the top of their class and they were supposed to know everything, or maybe they've struggled a bit and they don't want anyone to know they're struggling. This is, again, a chance to say, I got this, I'm ready. But the most important thing that we can help students learn is how to ask for help, right? So you're going into your first exam, for example. Don't wait until after the exam to say, gosh, I wish I would have known how to approach the studying of this exam, or I wish I would have asked a question before your first college exam. Go talk to the study center or talk to the professor or talk to the TA. So this notion of getting that muscle ready about how to ask for help, right? It could be your family. It could be picking up the phone and calling the school and saying, I want to know, do I need extra long twin sheets or just regular twin sheets, right? It could be something as simple as that. But that's an important skill. And I think something just from an advice perspective, start it now and continue. Ask the question that's on the tip of your tongue. Never be afraid to ask the question. Just never be afraid. In our family, we talk about asking for things. If you ask, you'll get an answer. If you don't ask, you don't know the answer. If you ask, you might get it. If you don't ask, you'll never get it. So I would encourage students to ask for help. And that will really also help address the imposter syndrome. We've all been in spaces where, and I think Sal, you said this earlier, we think everyone around us knows what they're doing because they're posing, they're pretending. But this is the first experience for many students. And if you're in an environment with a sophomore or junior at your college, they were first ones too. So they know what that's like. So ask for help. I think you asked about our hopes for students and families. I hope that this is an opportunity. I hope that students and their families can experience this moment of growth. The chance to see this student whom you've spent your life nurturing and supporting and hoping for and excited about the possibility that's in front of them. I hope you can enjoy this moment and see that they did it and you did it as a family. You got your student to the point where they're going to college. They, you know, whatever type of school they're going to, whatever type of college or university they're going to, they are taking that next step because they had the intelligence, the strength, the conviction, the interest, the curiosity to get there. And because you as a family supported them and guided, and you were guiding them to this point. So I hope that students can see this as a choice. They're making a choice to go to school. It's a place that they want to be, and they're making a choice to take that next step. And that is exciting. This is an I get to moment. We get to do this together.
Well, we'll leave it on that because that's a great message. And I'm really grateful for you both joining us this evening. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. I know there were a bunch of questions specific to admission, and we will be back to answer all of those in the fall.
And people should
We
watch the recordings of the more admissions focused
yes.
interviews we did earlier this year.
Yeah. There's a whole about 5 or 6 different ones from before, and we'll send those out with a link to this. And this is the last one for this academic year, but we will be back more with the College Mission Lab in the fall. And just thank you all and have a great summer.
Thank you.
Great summer, everyone. Good luck with the transition. It's exciting.
Learn to do the laundry.
Yeah.